The night over Eastern Europe was thick with silence, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery and the hum of unseen engines. In the war-torn towns of Ukraine, people whispered about a story that was spreading like wildfire across soldiers, pilots, and intelligence circles alike. The story was not about politics or leaders, but about two machines of death and power: Russia's Su-35 and Sweden's Gripen. And according to those whispers, a clash between them had already happened, somewhere in the unseen skies. A clash so extraordinary that it could tilt the entire balance of the war. The Su-35 had always been Russia's pride, a weapon designed to terrify. Pilots called it the Predator, armed with long-range missiles and powerful engines that made it soar like a beast. For months, the Russian Air Force used it to dominate the skies, striking Ukrainian positions with impunity. Every time its radar locked onto a target, soldiers below knew destruction would follow. Yet, in the midst of this terror, another name appeared, quietly, like a ghostly echo. Gripen. Unlike the loud reputation of the Su-35, the Gripen entered the story like a whisper from the north, subtle and mysterious. It was not yet seen in large numbers, but tales of its power were enough to rattle nerves. According to the first rumor, the Gripen had already faced a Su-35 in a secret simulation arranged by NATO. The Russian jet fired missile after missile, each guided by its cutting-edge radar. But something strange happened. The Gripen vanished from the scope, reappearing miles away, moving in ways the Su-35 couldn't predict. Pilots who claimed to have seen the classified footage swore that the Gripen seemed to dance in the clouds, always one step ahead, as if it knew what the Russian pilot would do before he did it. When the battle ended, the Su-35 was locked in the Gripen's crosshairs. No missile was fired, but the message was clear. The Russian giant could bleed. Soon, strange stories spread across Ukrainian bases. Spotters claimed that during one mission, a Su-35 had suddenly gone blind, its instruments turning into static for half a minute. When the radar cleared, a shadowy aircraft appeared for a split second before vanishing again. That shadow, soldiers insisted, was the Gripen. Was it really there? No one could prove it, but the fear of the unseen was often more powerful than the fear of what could be seen. Russian pilots, once confident kings of the air, now flew with unease, checking their six every few seconds, as if something invisible hunted them. In NATO's hidden chambers, analysts debated whether releasing these stories was part of a psychological war. Some argued that even a rumor could weaken Russia's dominance, planting doubt in the minds of its pilots. Others warned that Gripen's involvement might already be more than a rumor. Sweden had denied direct involvement, but the Gripen was uniquely suited for Ukraine's needs. Small, light, able to operate from highways instead of massive runways. Where the Su-35 needed sprawling bases, the Gripen could rise from the hidden corners of war-torn landscapes, strike, and vanish before anyone knew it was there. Was this why the rumors felt so real? In the villages near the front lines, civilians swore they saw strange lights in the skies. Some claimed the Su-35s roared overhead, only to be chased by a smaller, swifter shadow that appeared and disappeared like a phantom. Farmers whispered that the ghost jet was protecting them, sent by allies who didn't want to be known. Others dismissed it as imagination born of fear. But deep down, even skeptics wondered, what if the Gripen truly had entered the battlefield in secret? What if its mission was to prove something. Not to the world, but to the enemy. Meanwhile, Russian intelligence scrambled for answers. Reports came in of pilots returning shaken, claiming that their missile locks had failed against a mysterious target. Some were ridiculed, told they were victims of faulty equipment. But the pattern was impossible to ignore. Again and again, the same words appeared in debriefs: radar interference, target vanished, ghost contact. By the fifth such report, commanders ordered an internal review. What they found, though never officially released, only deepened the unease. Radar data showed anomalies, patterns of jamming too advanced to be accidental. And in one haunting clip, a blip appeared behind a Su-35, close enough to strike before fading into nothingness. Ukraine's soldiers clung to the rumor like hope. The Su-35 had once seemed unstoppable, a sky-bound executioner. But now, the legend of the Gripen gave them something else to believe in. That the predator could be hunted, that the hunter itself could feel fear. Whether real or myth, the Gripen's shadow hung over the battlefield, changing the psychology of war without firing a single missile. The night was cold, and the clouds rolled thick above the eastern horizon. Somewhere beyond that darkness, engines roared. It began like a whisper, then a scream of metal. A Russian Su-35 cut through the sky, its radar sweeping wide arcs, hunting. Inside the cockpit, the pilot, call sign Buran, leaned forward, his gloved hand steady on the throttle. He had been briefed of rumors, warnings that something new was out there. But he dismissed them as NATO tricks. Tonight, however, he felt the unease of being watched. At the same time, many miles away, another engine purred, lighter, subtler, and far less dramatic. The Swedish-built Gripen streaked across the clouds, its pilot locked in silence. The call sign was Viking. Unlike Buran, Viking carried no illusions of power. He knew the Gripen was smaller, with fewer missiles, but its strength lay elsewhere. Electronic warfare systems hummed, quietly weaving shadows across the radar spectrum. Viking's eyes darted over his display, showing bursts of interference, then gaps. The Su-35 was already searching. The game had begun. "Target acquired," Buran whispered to himself as the Su-35's radar caught a faint echo. A lock-on alert pulsed in Viking's cockpit, but instead of panic, he smirked. With a flick of his fingers, he unleashed counter-jamming. Instantly, the Su-35's radar painted noise, as if the target had shattered into 10 false echoes. Buran cursed. He switched frequencies, tightened his radar cone, but each attempt gave him only fleeting glimpses. Somewhere in that void, the Gripen danced. The first missile screamed free from the Su-35, tearing into the clouds. Viking rolled the Gripen sharply, diving low, then climbed at a steep angle, dragging the missile into a futile chase. The warning tone in his cockpit cut out. The missile had lost lock. His hand brushed the weapons panel. He could have fired back, but this fight was not just about shooting. It was about showing what the Gripen could do. He closed in silently, radar off, using passive sensors to stalk his prey. Buran's heart raced as he scanned his displays. "Where are you?" he muttered. He kicked the Su-35 into a violent turn, afterburners blazing, slicing through cloud layers. For a moment, the skies were empty. Then, a flicker. His infrared sensor caught a faint trail. He swung his nose and squeezed the trigger. Another missile streaked away. Viking felt the lock warning scream again. This time, he used a trick. He cut throttle suddenly, letting the missile overshoot as he banked sideways. The missile tore through the empty night. The two fighters now circled, Predator and Phantom, each testing the other. The Gripen had guile, agility, and its electronic cloak. Pilots on both sides knew that this duel, though unseen by the world, could become the battle that redefined air warfare. Inside the Gripen, Viking whispered, "Your strength is your weakness." He flipped his jammer to full power. Buran's radar went black. Static screamed across his headset, and for the first time in his career, he was blind. Panic clawed at him. He broke hard left, then right, desperate to shake whatever ghost hunted him. Then came the moment. Viking eased the Gripen up behind the Su-35, his targeting system silently locking. A soft tone echoed, the kind that told him the kill was his. His thumb hovered over the trigger. But the mission wasn't to destroy, it was to prove. He held his fire. In Buran's cockpit, alarms blared as his defensive systems realized a lock was on him. From nowhere, his breath froze. "Impossible," he muttered. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the Gripen vanished again into the night. The lock disappeared. Buran was left shaken, sweat dripping under his helmet, heart pounding like a drum. He had not been shot down, but he knew he had been defeated in that moment. On the ground, Ukrainian spotters later reported strange lights and missile trails, with no wreckage to confirm the outcome. Rumors spread faster than truth. Some said the Gripen had downed the Su-35, but NATO covered it up. Others insisted it was only a rehearsal, a test to send a warning. But for those who believed the whispers, the legend was born. The Russian pilot, Buran, never spoke of that night in detail. He flew lower, checked his six constantly, and avoided lonely skies. Fear, once unknown to him, had taken root. For the Ukrainians who heard the story, hope took shape in the shadow of a jet they had never truly seen. And for NATO, the demonstration was priceless. They knew now that the balance of power could tilt, not by brute force, but by a ghostly dance in the sky. The battle was over, yet unfinished. Gripen had shown its hand, but not fully. The war, already cruel and uncertain, now carried a new question whispered in bunkers, trenches, and control rooms. If this was only the first encounter, what would happen when the Gripen and Su-35 met again in the open, with nothing left to hold back? The dawn broke over the battered landscape of Ukraine, but the skies carried a silence that felt unnatural. Both sides knew something had shifted. The Russian command had received Buran's shaken report, and though officials tried to bury it under bureaucracy, whispers spread like wildfire across air bases. Pilots who once laughed at NATO technology now carried unease in their eyes. They knew the Gripen was no longer a rumor. It was a hunter waiting in the shadows. In secret hangars, Ukrainian officers gathered with foreign advisors, studying classified data. Radar anomalies, intercepted comms, and fragments of electronic interference all pointed to one truth. The Gripen had entered the war, even if unofficially. But there was a deeper fear. If Russia realized this fully, retaliation could escalate the conflict into something far beyond Ukraine's borders. Thus, the story had to remain in the twilight, half hidden, half revealed. Yet the more they tried to control it, the faster it spread. Soldiers in trenches told each other about the phantom jet. Civilians described lights that danced across the sky. To the weary hearts of Ukraine, it was not just a weapon. It was a symbol. Meanwhile, Deep within Russian strategy rooms, another plan was forming. If the Gripen truly stalked the skies, it had to be lured out, exposed, and crushed publicly. Elite pilots were briefed in hushed tones. "If you see the ghost," their commanders said, "do not underestimate it." Entire missions were redesigned, baiting Ukrainian defenses with Su-35 patrols, hoping to draw the Gripen into a confrontation. Weeks passed. At first, nothing happened, but then came the night over the Dnipro. The Su-35s flew in formation, their afterburners slicing across the frozen air. Hidden among them, advanced sensors scanned every corner of the sky. For a while, silence mocked them. Then, without warning, one of the radars flickered. A faint blip appeared where no aircraft should be. The pilot called it out, his voice tight. Before he could react, the blip vanished. Seconds later, another appeared behind a different Su-35. It was as if the Gripen was playing with them, slipping in and out of the ether. Panic rippled through the formation. Missiles were armed, commands shouted, but each time they turned, there was nothing. And then, a chilling moment. One Su-35 pilot screamed over comms. His systems showed a hard lock from the rear. He braced for impact, certain death. But no missile came. Instead, the lock disappeared. Silence fell. The Gripen was not there to kill. Not yet. It was there to prove a point. It could destroy them whenever it wished. That single realization cracked the confidence of Russia's most elite flyers. For NATO strategists, this was gold. A weapon that instilled fear without firing was worth more than 100 victories. But for the pilots themselves, it was a ghost story that grew with each retelling. Some swore they saw the Gripen dance through clouds, invisible to radar, yet glowing faintly in moonlight. Others insisted it could mimic friendly signatures, making Russian jets mistake it for their own until it was too late. The truth, hidden behind layers of secrecy, only deepened the myth. Weeks later, reports reached the Kremlin. Morale among Su-35 pilots was cracking. Missions were aborted, engagements avoided, excuses made. The hunter no longer hunted with confidence. The legend of invincibility was broken. But with this came a terrifying thought for both sides. If Gripen truly became Ukraine's sword, how would Russia respond? Would it escalate to weapons no one wanted unleashed? The balance teetered on a knife's edge. And so, the story of the dogfight that could change Ukraine's war remained shrouded in uncertainty. No official record declared it. No wreckage proved it. Yet everyone, from trench to command bunker, spoke of it as truth. The Su-35, the beast of Russia, had been marked by a ghost from Sweden. The Gripen had shown that the predator could bleed. In the end, perhaps that was the true weapon. Not the missile that struck, but the fear that lingered. Not the wreckage in flames, but the silence of a pilot who knew he had been defeated without ever being destroyed. The war dragged on, but under every sky, one question haunted both sides. When the Gripen and Su-35 meet again, not in rumor, not in shadow, but in open combat, who will walk away, and who will fall? Until that day comes, the legend of the dogfight remains, a secret that shapes the war without ever being written in its history books.